is my hero. My mother, Eloisa Domingo de Jesus, raised my 6 siblings and me after emigrating with my father from the Philippines in 1960, and she was a pretty amazing woman. But it wasn't until after becoming a mother myself that I truly began to appreciate what this might have meant for her, what a momentous job this must have been for her, and what sacrifices she must have made for us, her children. And I thought of the isolation she must have felt at times. First of all, she and my father, both born in the Philippines, met in college, fell in love, and began their life together. My dad earned his engineering master's degree at Lehigh and took a job in Baltimore, Maryland, after they decided they could make the best life for their children with the best opportunities in the United States. But because of immigrant quotas in the late 1950s and 1960s, my mom had to wait to emigrate and stayed with relatives in Mexico. And she was pregnant with me. Fondly recalling those times, she used to like to joke that I was almost hecho en Mexico, which means made in Mexico. Finally, in early 1960, she was allowed to enter the U.S., and I was born in March in Baltimore. They then had 2 more children, and we moved here to Bethlehem. My dad settled into his job with Bethlehem Steel, and Mom continued being a stay-at-home mom, and they had 4 more children. It's almost incomprehensible to me how my mom did everything for all of us without any help. She cooked, cleaned, sewed, and knitted clothes for us. She was an excellent seamstress, knitter, and crocheter. She made Christmas ornaments, our Christmas stockings, and at least 10 different types of Christmas cookies every year. She made so many special memories for us, and with my dad, taught us about the importance of family. This last point, the importance of family, must have held a certain sting for my mom, as much as it held a beautiful promise. She was teaching us to cherish our family, all the while she was thousands of miles away from her own family. Emigrating from the Philippines, she left behind a sister, 3 brothers, and her parents. I think of her bravery and all her love and hopes for the future that enabled her to make this sacrifice. But it is hard for me to imagine how that must have felt. It is difficult to imagine the isolation she must have experienced, moving to a faraway, sometimes hostile culture, especially during the 1960s. This was a time of racial upheaval in this country, and here came my parents, dark-skinned, the first family of color in the neighborhood, the first non-white family at church and in the Catholic school. She must have felt so alone at times with no family, no support system, no one that looked like her, until she was able to start making some friends. She once told me that when she moved to the U.S., she thought about the possibility that she would never go home again, that when she said goodbye to her family, she was really saying goodbye. And this became the reality of her journey here. And during my childhood years, she never went back home. She communicated with her family through letters and the occasional phone call. I remember my parents making long-distance calls at night to their families because in those days, it was cheaper to call after 11 p.m. And that is how they maintained their relationships. Sadly, her mother passed away when I was in high school. I can still remember returning home late one night after play practice and feeling that something was amiss. My father told me that my grandmother had died. My mom had lost her mom after never returning to the Philippines. I can still see my mom sitting alone on the sofa in the basement, mostly in the dark, grieving by herself. I didn't know what to say, and she did not go home to say her final goodbye. She felt like she couldn't. Looking back on that now, I can only imagine the deep sadness that must have pulled at her heart, and how isolated she must have felt then, thinking that she would not go home to be with and grieve with her family. My mother, Eloisa, passed away on November 7th, 2015. As the eldest of her 7 children, my siblings felt that I should give a eulogy. I was so full of memories and thoughts and feelings as I thought about my mom and her life. And 2 nights before her service, as I sat down to write for her, I became aware that there may have been some similarities in our experiences of beginning our families. The similarity of isolation, my mom being an immigrant in a difficult time as she and my dad raised their children. My isolation came in my struggles of infertility. I was trying to begin a family with great difficulty, and I remember the pain of hope and failure while not knowing anyone else with the same struggle. I had a couple friends starting families, and of course, everywhere I went, it seemed there were pregnant women or small children. The aloneness of infertility was something I had never experienced, and this was something that no one could really go through with me. Failure led to another failure, as I felt I would do anything to become pregnant. Finally, I had an epiphany that becoming a mother was the more important and separate outcome that I truly wanted. So through adoption, I now have two lovely girls who just turned 10 and 5 last month. They both knew and loved their Grammy Eloisa and feel that she is our angel now watching over us. Sadly, I never had the opportunity to meet my grandmother, my mom's mom. She was never able to make the long trip from the Philippines to visit the United States. My mother will always be my hero. Oftentimes, I feel like I am underwater, and I only have 2 children. But my brave, beautiful, hopeful, intelligent mother left her home and her family in the Philippines to make a life and create her own family in a different and sometimes unwelcoming culture. She sacrificed so much for us, and she gave so much to us, both tangible and intangible. And she is isolated no more because she is finally drinking coffee and laughing and dancing with my dad up there in the clouds.